Welcome to the City Club of Portland Friday Forum. City Club is where we bring civic-minded people together to make Portland and Oregon a better place to live, work, and play for everyone. I'm KERVIN, President of City Club, and I would like to welcome members and guests alike, those of you who join us today at Sentinel, and those of you listening on OPB Radio or watching on Portland Community Media. The generous support of City Club's corporate and media partners ensures we put on the state's best civic programs week after week. I'd like to thank our media partner, Oregon Business Magazine. Our current Friday Forum sponsors are AARP, Barron Liebman, Portland General Electric, Perkins Coie, Iberdrola Renewables, and Providence Health and Services. We are grateful for your support and commitment to City Club's mission. Please join me in a warm round of applause for all of them. Please join us next week when we host the gubernatorial debate between John Kitzhaber and Dennis Richardson. We will start at a special time. Doors will open at 11:15 and the program will begin at noon. Please join us on Tuesday, October 7 for election civic drinks. We invited candidates and statewide and local ballot measure campaigns. You can learn more about City Club events, purchase tickets, and become a member on our website, PDXCITYCLUB.org. As always, City Club will be live tweeting at today's event. You can follow or mention us at PDXCITYCLUB, and be sure to follow the conversation by using the hashtag PDXCityClub in your own tweets. Today's moderator, Jenny Madcore, will facilitate a Q&A session with the audience and our guests. Members, please come to the microphone to ask your question. For all of our audience members, please locate the index cards on the center of your tables and write your questions on them during the forum. Hold your cards up high, and City Club staff will collect them prior to the start of Q&A. And now for our program. America is facing a retirement security crisis, and Oregon is not immune. In 2010, 75% of Americans nearing retirement had less than $30,000 in their retirement accounts. Even more disturbing, half of all private sector workers currently have no employer-provided retirement plan. While this crisis is acknowledged by government, businesses, unions, investors, and others, more must be done to address it. Ken Mehlman is a member at Kohlberg, Kravis, Roberts and Company. Ken helps assess and improve the companies in which it invests by better understanding and managing geopolitical risk and engaging with their key stakeholders. Ken also oversees the firm's global external affairs activities, including corporate marketing, regulatory affairs, and public policy and communications. Kathleen Kennedy Townsend founded the Center for Retirement Initiatives at the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University, where she is a research professor. The initial focus of the center is to help states plan and implement policies and programs that would make it easier for people who do not have easy access to a pension plan to save for their senior years. Ted Wheeler has elevated the position of treasurer to mean so much more than managing the state's financial health. For him, it's about making Oregon work better for every Oregonian. In 2014, the National Conference on Public Employee Retirement Systems named Ted its elected official of the year for working to increase retirement savings and options for private sector employees. And Jenny Madcore joined the office of Multnomah County Attorney in 2001 as an employment and civil rights litigator. As the county's chief legal officer, Jenny continues to litigate, leads a staff of 21 legal professionals, and provides legal guidance to the Board of Commissioners, sheriff, auditor, and to the county's various departments and divisions. Please join me in welcoming today's guests.
Well, welcome to this Friday Forum. Today we're going to be talking about a really interesting topic, not only for me personally, but for our entire community. In fact, the entire country. We're going to be talking about retirement savings, what we can do about increasing people's ability to save, and the other sort of tools that are available out there for everybody in our community to have a healthy, productive lifestyle in their future and in their later years. Now, I think we can all agree that saving is a good idea, but what the research shows is that many of us just aren't saving enough, and some of us aren't saving at all. So this is an issue that our legislature in Oregon decided to tackle. We created the Retirement Savings Task Force, which Treasurer Wheeler, who's sitting at the end over here, he headed that up. And most recently, the task force made recommendations to the Oregon legislature, creating a plan or proposing that a plan be created that allows private employees to have their own retirement savings plan if their employer doesn't already provide one for them. So today we're going to talk more about that plan. We're going to talk about the legal and global landscape associated with retirement and retirement savings. And we're going to hope to have a discussion which brings out some of the difficulties, the challenges, and the opportunities. So what we're going to do today, we're going to start with our speakers having a brief opening statement to put these concepts into, give us some clarity. Then we'll have some question and answer back and forth between the panel members. And finally, we'll open it up for members of the audience and City Club members to ask questions. So let's start with our Treasurer Wheeler. If you could put this issue into perspective for us and give us some ideas about what we can do.
You bet. Well, first of all, thank you very much. I particularly am excited about today's forum. This is an issue that I'm very passionate about, and I applaud all of you who are members of the City Club for helping bring together this panel. First of all, I just want to start by saying the issue of retirement security is clearly a national issue, but it has implications for Oregon. So we're going to talk about the issue from a national perspective, but we're also going to bring it right back here to Oregon to talk about our own situation and some of the strategies that we're seeking to employ to address the retirement security crisis in the state of Oregon. I want to also point out that retirement security, according to national polls, is now the #1 financial issue confronting American households. So it's an important context. A lot of people agree with me that we need to act now, we need to act quickly to reduce the impact of what I believe is a generational crisis, one that threatens to plunge seniors into poverty, disrupt entire families, and impact the overall economy. I couldn't be more pleased to be here on the stage with Kathleen and with Ken. They're acknowledged national leaders in the arena of retirement security, and I think all of us here in the state of Oregon are really lucky that they were willing to take time out of their busy schedules to join us here today. So thank you both for being here. I first met Kathleen and Ken together, it was probably about 2.5 years ago, when we convened a national bipartisan roundtable in New York City for the purpose of discussing how we could increase retirement savings nationally. That meeting included participants from global financial service firms, from labor unions, and from state treasurers from all around the country, Democrats and Republicans. At the end of the meetings, we agreed that we needed improved financial tools and strategies to encourage additional savings for retirement. And we also agreed, importantly, that we wanted to continue to work together as a coalition to begin addressing this issue. In the subsequent months that followed, Kathleen and others led the effort to create the Center for Retirement Initiatives, which, as Jenny had mentioned, is at Georgetown University. It was really conceived of as a place to provide technical expertise and information to individual states that were interested in addressing this issue the way that the state of Oregon is. And so it's more of an opportunity to help states find policies and procedures and programs that can help us address the issues. It's an acknowledgement that not every state is going to come to the same conclusion about how best to address this crisis, but it's also an acknowledgement that we collectively believe that states are going to lead the charge They're going to be the innovators. They're going to be the ones that come up with unique strategies. And it's going to vary from state to state, depending upon the different retirement needs in given states, and depending, frankly, upon the different perspectives that states hold about the appropriate role of government when it comes to the retirement security arena. There's a bad news, good news aspect to this at the state level, speaking narrowly about the state of Oregon circumstances. On one hand, retirement security is a crisis nationally, and as Jenny said, we're not immune from it here in the state of Oregon. On the positive side, Oregon is a nationally regarded leader when it comes to policies around retirement security. It was to that end that the state legislature in 2013 created the Retirement Savings Task Force. I was honored to be asked to chair that effort, and we were given very explicit directions, as you might imagine, by the legislature. They wanted us to look at the state of retirement security in Oregon. They wanted us to identify strategies that work or don't work in terms of encouraging participation in retirement strategies and encouraging people to save enough if they're in a retirement plan. They also wanted us to make recommendations to the legislature in terms of how a state-sponsored retirement program might look, in terms of what attributes it might have and what steps the legislature would need to take should they choose to enact a statewide strategy. Well, our task force collectively heard a lot of information from a lot of experts from all over the country. We heard from nonprofit leaders who talked about how a lack of retirement security for older adults in Oregon leads to excessive use and reliance on very expensive safety net programs. In other words, if the state of Oregon can't find ways, working in partnership with employers and others, to increase voluntary retirement savings, the cost to taxpayers could be enormous in terms of increased reliance on social services down the road. The first thing our task force did was actually look at the work of a previous retirement security task force, which was impaneled by a different legislature in Oregon nearly 20 years ago. That task force was facing a slightly different set of circumstances. At the time, people were concerned about the so-called wave of baby boomers who were reaching retirement, and there were questions about whether or not Social Security would be able to absorb all those retiring baby boomers. There are also structural changes taking place in the retirement plan arena. Most notably, a lot of corporate America was moving away from defined benefit plans towards so-called defined contribution plans, basically 401ks. And one important implication of that was it meant that employees themselves had to take on more responsibility for their own retirement savings. We also heard from small business interests. Small businesses, while expressing support for retirement security, are very concerned about the state's involvement and how it might increase costs or increase regulations that are placed on small businesses, a legitimate issue. Equally legitimate, we heard from large financial service firms who wanted to make sure that if the state exerts leadership in this arena, that it does so in a way that does not undercut strong existing retirement plans that exist throughout employers in the state of Oregon. We also had what I would describe as lively and robust discussions with economists. They introduced us to some of the behavioral issues and some of the structural issues in retirement plans that either encourage and incentivize retirement savings or alternatively potentially disincentivize retirement savings. And last but not least, our panel had some lively discussions as well about the subject of the appropriate role of government in the retirement security arena. Some on our panel felt very comfortable with the idea that the state should be actively involved in operating a retirement plan on behalf of its citizens. Others, and this is probably more where my own personal opinion lies, felt that it should be a state-sponsored program whereby the state impanels a board to ensure transparency and public accountability, but the plan would be then RFP'd or sent out to the private sector with the public board determining what the criteria are in the plan, what the operational procedures should be, what the determined outcomes would be, and then the private sector would manage the plan. If that sounds familiar, it probably is, because it's exactly the model we've used very successfully for our 529 college savings plan, where we have a public board appointed by the governor and ratified by the legislature. They determine the attributes of the plan, and then private sector organizations compete for the right to provide that service to Oregon citizens. So that was the context. At the end of the day, I believe our task force did a very thoughtful and thorough job of evaluating all of the information. They put together what I think are very responsible recommendations to the state legislature, and they laid out what I think are very methodical and very properly sequenced next steps in terms of where the legislature should go. At the end of the day, our core recommendation was that the state of Oregon implement a voluntary retirement savings plan that would be available to all Oregonians who do not currently have access to a retirement plan through their place of employment. We encourage the legislature to act decisively on this program. The prior task force that I mentioned from 20 years ago, that report made a lot of the same recommendations. None of them were implemented. The problem's gotten worse, folks, over the years. It has not gotten better. As you heard right up front, half of Oregonians who work in the private sector do not have access to a retirement plan in their place of employment. Too many older adults, and understand this, the number of older adults, people over 65 in the state, is going to double in the next 20 years. Too many older adults in this state are retiring with inadequate savings to get them through their golden years. Many of those older adults are going to retire right into poverty. When we dug deeper as a task force, we found that women and minorities and employees of small businesses were disproportionately amongst the ranks of those who face retirement insecurity. And for those of you here today or listening on the radio or watching who are thinking this does not apply to you because you're too young, think again. This is all about the millennial generation. I hate to say it, because your generation has had a rough time of it economically, but your generation has the lowest savings rate of any generation in modern United States history. It's not your fault. You've taken on a lot of student debt, and you've graduated into an economy that has not provided you the kind of employment or the kind of access to retirement savings tools that could help you begin the important process of saving early and often for your own retirement. But make no mistake, this is about you. So at the end of the day, our task force recommended a plan. We recommended 9 attributes that the plan should have, including that it should be voluntary, it should be automatic, you should be enrolled in it at the time that you're employed. The plan should be portable, it should go with you from employer to employer, and it should follow you in and out of retirement, and it should take advantage of the power of pooled and professionally managed financial resources to keep the returns high and the costs low. We strongly recommend that the legislature codify these recommendations and that we are given resources to continue the important work to address the many unanswered questions that remain ahead. I just want to say this in closing. Wouldn't it be great, with all of the financial issues confronting Oregon families today, if we could take some of the insecurity out of retirement planning? Think about what it would mean for our state to create a voluntary, automatic, secure, pooled and professionally managed retirement option for the 50% of Oregonians who do not have access to a retirement plan through their place of employment. It would help provide financial security to individuals, to families, and ultimately, I believe, to the state of Oregon. I hope you'll join me in pushing for that type of a strategy moving forward. And I want to say again how much I'm appreciative of being here on the stage with our distinguished guests, and how much I appreciate the City Club of Portland for hosting this great panel. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Treasurer Wheeler. Next, we're going to hear from Ms. Kathleen Kennedy Townsend. Ms. Kennedy Townsend, if you could please go next. Give us your thoughts from your perspective as a national leader in this area.
Sure. Thank you so much. Well, I am delighted to be here in Oregon, and I'm really thrilled to be with your treasurer, Ted, who's done a terrific job as a leader in retirement security, and Ken Mehlman, who has done a wonderful, wonderful work in making sure that we can fund the center at Georgetown, and really was an early leader on retirement security, really started about 6 years ago trying to get this off the ground because he understood and was really one of the visionary leaders about how we need to do something about retirement security early on. And what happens, as you know, sometimes you hit a moment and people understand it's a problem. 20 years ago, you said you were trying to do something and it didn't go anywhere. But now people are really willing to listen. Just to give you an example about people willing to listen, Marco Rubio, have you heard of him? I just don't know if anybody in Oregon pays attention to what goes on the other side of the country. But Marco Rubio, for instance, who is a senator from Florida, has suggested, and he usually doesn't say anything good about the federal government, but has suggested, because he has read the same polls that Ted Wheeler referred to, the #1 issue of Americans that we've done polling, that has been done polling about, is retirement security, and he has said that every American should be able to buy in to the federal retirement system. Now just let that sink in for a minute. He has now said something good about the federal government. And that is an indication of how serious the retirement crisis is. Ted has done an extraordinary job here in Oregon. The report is beautifully written, it's lively, it's interesting, and I called him up to congratulate how well it is done, and it wakes you up. A, as to what the crisis should be, and B, as he said so well, what the solutions can be. And Oregon is really not alone. Now, when we started, the three of us and a few others, a number of SEIU and AFSCME and AFT and NEA, started this center at Georgetown, we realized that states were going to become more and more interested in what they're going to do on retirement security, because despite Senator Rubio, there's not a lot of action, you may have heard, at the federal government, and so we have to work with the states. At one point, 6 years ago, there was really basically a very few states involved, and there are now 25 states. Half of the states in the country are now interested in doing something on retirement security. So it has grown exponentially. Just as Ted was the chair in Oregon, the governor asked me to be the chair in Maryland as to what we should do on the issue. And let me just give you some examples. He's told you what his suggestions are in Oregon. I'll just give you some other options that other states are pursuing. Massachusetts, for instance, has said that nonprofits can buy into the state system because they saw that lots of nonprofits don't have the infrastructure or the money to be able to set up their own 401k system, which can be very expensive to do, and so why not just buy into the state pension system, which they're doing. It takes a little while to do it. That's what they're doing. In Minnesota, some state legislatures have suggested that they put an additional tax onto your Social Security tax and put that extra money into an investment vehicle, and so that you would invest the money and make money off of your Social Security tax, sort of privatizing that part of the funding. Indiana, again, a Republican state, has suggested that everybody be able to have like a 529 plan, like the college plan. In addition, promised to have a match of $250 for the first $250 that each person saves. So what I'm trying to say is that across the country, people are looking at different options as to what they can do to make a difference as far as savings is concerned. What I wanted to underscore, and what Ted mentioned, is that what we've seen is a couple of things. Number one, small businesses. At least in Maryland, and I would say that the treasurer of West Virginia has discovered, in order to build support for his plan in West Virginia, he's gone from county to county, talking to small businesses and asking them, has anybody come and approached you from the financial services and said to you, are you interested in a retirement plan? And lo and behold, not a single financial services has actually asked, because it doesn't make sense for them financially to develop a 401k plan for a 2 or 3 person firm that doesn't make over $18,000 a year per person. So all these small businesses in rural America are not having an opportunity to have retirement because the financial services industry aren't actually even reaching out to them. So he's getting those small businesses to call the state legislature and say, hey, we like the idea of having a state plan because it will give me, the owners of the small businesses, and our employees an opportunity to save for retirement. All of this goes to Ted's point. What happens in different states depends on who's in your state. For instance, in California, the financial services industry didn't like what was proposed. In the state of Maryland, Legg Mason and T. Rowe Price, which are 2 large financial firms, are on my task force, and they're eager to have this legislation go through. They think it's really important that people save, because they think the more people save, the more that they might use the financial services products. In fact, the head of BlackRock, Larry Fink, you may have heard, has said that we should require everybody to have a retirement account, as they do in Australia. Again, because he sees the problem, but you might also say because he says that if everybody has to save, they're going to use the financial services to save in. So it's a really interesting issue that goes beyond party lines. Ken, as you may know, is a Republican. Did you know that? I just thought I'd point that out. I, as you may know, am a Democrat. Hello. Thank you, Oregon. So the point is that what retirement security does is it brings different people from different parties together. It brings different people from small business and financial services together. It can bring old and young together, because we all have an interest in making sure that enough people have enough money to live on in their older years. Nobody has an interest in having people live out their older years in poverty. I want to just end with the notion, and Ted mentioned this, about the value of pooled and professionally managed assets. One of the things that we've learned with the difference between defined benefit plans and the defined contribution plans is that in a defined benefit plan, which was terrific at its moment in history, because it really guaranteed that anybody retired would have money for the rest of their life, however long they lived. And it worked when people stayed and worked for the same business for a long period of time. It worked. But when the economy changed, and when, to tell you the truth, our accounting rules changed, it made it difficult for businesses to continue those defined benefit plans. We can get into that if you want during the question and answer. And so many businesses moved to defined contribution plans in which all the risk left the people who were better able to bear it and put it on the individual. So an individual basically had to decide when to be born, when to die, and hope they could invest as well as Warren Buffett. Hard to do. And as you can see from many of the 401ks, 40% of money is often withdrawn from those accounts each year. And it has meant, as you've seen from the results, that Even those who save have on average only $100,000 in their accounts when they retire, which, given the fact that we are going to live 17 years past retirement age, means we really don't have, many Americans don't have enough to retire on, even if they do have that 401k system. So what we're trying to at least create an option for those who don't have enough is to have a pooled asset, so the risks can be shared not just by an individual, but by lots of people across generations, number one, and also allow people to invest in all sorts of different types of assets. Because if you're allowed to go across different assets and you're allowed to have risks across different generations, your returns are going to be better. If I was allowed to do slides, which I asked Ted if I was, and he said, not at the City Club, you could see that it's about a 47% better chance of retirement security rather than if you have to do it all by yourself. So that's what we're trying to do, at least with pooled and professionally managed assets. That doesn't mean you're going to get rid of the individual accounts. They certainly serve an important purpose, but you want to make sure there are options for those who don't know enough about how to manage their own money. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathleen. Mr. Mehlman, your thoughts on this issue and how your perspective informs the retirement savings issues?
Well, first of all, thank you, and Ted, thanks for inviting us out to such a beautiful state. It's always great to be here. I want to thank AARP also for your leadership, not only on this particular event, but in helping so many people have fantastic retirements and have better savings. I also want to thank the Portland Club. I think that listening to your upcoming program, one of the reasons that Oregon has good government is you bring people together to talk and to discuss. And I think that this is a fantastic venue, and I hope that, I'm not promising that I'll be watching more of these on television, but I really appreciate your leadership, and it's critically important. I'm a partner at a firm, KKR, that has over the years partnered with the Oregon Plan and provides today retirement security for 1.7 million Oregonians. And it's something that we're very proud of and we very much appreciate. As I listen to the discussion and I think about why we're here today, it reminds me of the opening of one of my favorite works of all time. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. On the one hand, we're talking about a really good situation. It's the best of times. The fact that so many people will have an ability after many years of hard work to have a second or third career, to have more time with their family, to volunteer and be involved in community, to travel, is an awesome thing. If you had told people in 1950 or 1960 about the fact that people would spend a third of their lives retired, they would have said, how can I get there? And so the fact that so many seniors, so many of our parents and grandparents can live out years, hopefully in good health, pursuing hobbies, contributing to the community, is a fantastic thing that we should all be incredibly pleased about. The reason it's also the worst of times, both Kathleen and Ted described. We have an actuarial problem. How do we pay for it? Particularly when the biggest generation in history, the baby boom generation, is about to retire. We were talking before, the fastest growing part of our population as a percentage are people over 100. People over 100 is the fastest growing part of the population. So the question is, how do we do both? In my opinion, the essence of leadership are people or institutions that are able to transform challenges into opportunities. And from that perspective, Oregon is and has been for years a real leader. For years, this state has led the way in terms of retirement security by having smart, well-managed, well-invested pension plans for the state. And now with today's announcement and the unveiling of this very important document and this important vision, there's an opportunity to take that leadership, take it to the next level, and take it forward when it comes to dealing with this challenge. There are a number of elements of this that to me are very exciting, but I'd like to explore a few. First, I think this plan is exciting and this plan is incredibly important because it allows essentially you to build on what already exists in the state, and Ted made that point. Whether it's the state plan or whether it's the large number of organizations in this state that already provide for people's retirement, the ingredients of success are already here and have already been successful. The only question is how do we expand it to the 50% of the population who don't yet benefit from these Oregon-grown solutions to retirement. Second, we're not just focused on savings. What this plan will do and what this approach will do, we know it from the existing state plan, is that money is not sitting in people's mattresses. It's building companies. It's building businesses. It's contributing to the community. So there's a virtuous cycle that occurs that's incredibly important and incredibly positive. Third, listen to the attributes that Ted described. Those attributes, it's voluntary. Existing companies don't have to pay for it, so there's no burden on existing business. Low fees, Oregon-grown solutions that are provided. What I like about what he described is it's highly flexible, and it looks back and it says, what are the objections people have had to this approach in the past, and how do we take those objections off the table so that we're in fact solving this problem without creating new problems. So it anticipates potential new problems, and it avoids those new problems in the future. And to me, that's also very important. This is an effort that, as has been noted, attracts not only bipartisan support, but support across all kinds of different constituencies. So you've got labor and business sitting on the same side of the table. You've got Republicans and Democrats, independents, sitting on the same side of the table. You've got the old and the young sitting on the same side of the table. So I just want to salute Ted. I want to salute the effort. This, to me, is the ultimate example of win-win. One final point. You know, when you sometimes bring this up, when I've talked about it, people have said, why not just let Washington solve the problem, D.C., not Washington State, because they're trying to solve it too. The reason is simple. Look around the country. What are the most innovative things happening? Whether it's cities that are being renewed because smart and creative mayors are partnering with businesses and universities and hospitals to renew those cities, or smart solutions like we've got right here to retirement. The best ideas aren't coming out of Washington. That place is stuck. The best ideas are coming around state leaders who recognize there's a way to have a win-win approach. So the last point is when people say, why can't we just wait for Washington? The reason is because we'll have to wait till the millennials are 100 years old, till they get their act together and solve the problem. So I want to salute Ted. I want to appreciate the invitation today. This is a really smart idea. It builds on what we already know that works. It incorporates existing key constituencies in Oregon and makes them part of the solution and enhances the role that they can play. It brings people together across the aisle. It also will help build even stronger economic growth in this state and economic growth around this nation. And it is absolutely worth continuing to move forward as we continue to look for ways to plan for transforming a challenge into what is actually an opportunity. So thank you, Ted.
Well, thank you all. I think we see some of the challenges that are brought forward with this, but as I think of this issue, one question just keeps coming back to me. And Treasurer Wheeler, I'd like to ask you, when people are struggling to make ends meet and just provide for their basic living needs, is it reasonable to expect them to save?
So I think we have to be honest and forthright and acknowledge that there are people in this state that are earning so little that they're literally living hand to mouth. And I think it's an unrealistic expectation that people who are the most vulnerable economically are going to have the ability to withdraw anything from their current income stream to be able to support retirement. That's why we need to continue to support a robust safety net mechanism for those in the state who are the most economically vulnerable. We hope to get them to the point where they could participate in a retirement savings plan. But what we're focused on here is the group of people just above those who really need to rely on safety net services. We're talking about people who either do not have access to a plan through their place of employment who could participate, or alternatively, we need to think larger about how people who are in places of employment who don't participate, how do we get them to participate? Or how do we get people to increase their contribution levels to their retirement plan so that they have saved as much as experts tell us that people need to save for, as Ken mentioned, their prolonged retirement? So my thinking is somewhat along the lines of what Ken had said earlier, that if we can get people to voluntarily save for their own retirement and have them become economically self-sufficient and participating in the larger economy during their retirement, they're not competing for expensive safety net services against people who really truly need those services.
Thank you. You know, as we talked about some of the elements of the plan, and Mr. Mehlman, I'm going to direct this question to you. Please, Ken. Ken, all right. So, Ken, we talked about some of the elements of the plan from the state of Oregon, and we mentioned opt-in versus opt-out. And so, can you explain the difference between the opt-out program, which is actually being, or I'm sorry, yes, the opt-out program that's being recommended, and why that's a good idea?
Well, I think it lets people, it does two things. One, to Ted's point, it recognizes that there are people that won't be able to do this, and they obviously need a different situation, but it lets people have a choice. People ought to have a choice in this, and letting them decide not to participate also has an option that's important for a lot of people. And the other thing that I think that helps as we do this, look, this can be done in a way that is very actuarially smart. So if you set appropriate contribution rates, if you have relatively low fees, if you've got it pooled and professionally managed, combine all of those and then think about whether it's the state plan here in Oregon or a lot of other institutions that already here in this state offer folks very good retirement. You combine that with letting people make that choice. I think it's a virtuous cycle, and it avoids the concern that, one, you're cannibalizing an existing approach. Second, you're forcing someone to do something that they don't want to do.
So what effects does this sort of retirement plan have on, Ted, you mentioned the effect on women and minorities. We know that statistically people who make less money are less likely to save, and we have some income disparities, especially with women and minorities. So, you know, Treasurer Wheeler, what are your thoughts on that, and how are we going to address that?
Well, for me, this is a pretty clear issue. This is where an economic issue collides with a social justice issue. Inequality in access to employment and high wages translates to inequality in retirement security. And our task force heard voluminous information from experts who showed us that women, particularly single female heads of households, and people of color are disproportionately represented amongst the ranks of those who do not save enough for retirement, and there are some specific reasons why. When it comes to women, and I'm speaking generally, I'm painting in average terms with a broad brush, generally women are paid a lot less than men. They tend to be clustered around employment that not only pays less, that employment tends to have less access to retirement plans, and it tends to be more likely to be part-time or seasonal employment. The net result is that at the end of a career, a man will have worked on average 40 years, a woman will have worked on average, if you total it up, 27 years at a lower wage. The net result is fewer assets invested in retirement plans or retirement security. That's ironic because, of course, women live a lot longer, so frankly, they need more assets. And it may help to explain why in the state of Oregon, amongst the 25% of the poorest retirees, 8 out of 10 are women. To further my wet blanket conversation, and I hope you really see this as a call to action as opposed to a wet blanket or depressing, the situation is even worse for people of color. There's unequal access, again, to educational opportunities, to employment opportunities, to high-wage opportunities, and even today, in the midst of this recovery, people of color right here in this community have much higher rates of unemployment. And again, that inequality in terms of access to employment and high wages translates to inequality in terms of retirement security. And I believe it is the affirmative responsibility of our state government to address that pressing issue on behalf of economically vulnerable citizens. That's part of the reason why I'm so passionate about this particular issue.
Well, thank you, Treasurer Wheeler. You know, this is a very robust discussion, and I think we could go on for quite some time, but we have come to the point in our program where it's now the Q&A section for members of the audience. So we're going to open it up to members of the audience. If you've written a question on an index card, please hold it up high so that a City Club member can collect it from you. We'll now take questions. As always, we invite members to the microphone to ask their questions. Asking questions at the Friday Forum microphone is a benefit of being a City Club member. Before asking your questions, please identify yourself as a City Club member and ask your questions in 30 seconds or less. Also, I will read an index card at some point during the program. Again, these are to be questions, not statements, and so welcome, sir.
My name is Edward Hershey. I'm a City Club member. Ken, the statewide pension plan that Treasurer Wheeler helps oversee has profited handsomely from investments in private equity groups like KKR. But to my mind, undeniably, KKR's practices leading to those profits have had deleterious impacts in the private sector on the nature and condition of employment. To what extent should large public sector pension plans and plans such as the one that Treasurer Wheeler's task force envisions and you've endorsed look at social consciousness in making investments?
Thank you for your question. It's a very important one, and it's actually one that I spend a considerable amount of my time focused on, which is what are the environmental, social, and governance impacts of the investments that we make. And we work very hard to make sure that we're not only doing well for the retirees that we have an obligation to have good returns on, but also we're also doing good in the companies in which we've invested. So a few examples of that that we are now focused on. First, the E, the environment. We have a partnership today at 25 of the companies we own around the world with the Environmental Defense Fund that focuses on environmental sustainability, because the reality is pollution's expensive. The more energy you use and the more carbon you generate, the more waste you generate, the more water that you use, the more forest products you use, the more expensive it is. And it focuses on operationally improving our company's footprint in these areas. We've saved over $1 billion bottom line. We've also saved tens of millions of trees. We've invested $1 billion in renewables because we believe very much in solutions to the challenges we face, both from an energy perspective and from a carbon perspective. You mentioned employment. Every single year during the financial crisis, the number of employees at our companies grew, not decreased, grew. When there are labor issues, we have a partnership with former U.S. Congressman Dick Gephardt that focuses on making sure our companies improve best practices. We have a partnership with the American Heart Association that covers 190,000 employees at 8 companies, where we pay the employees at those companies $250 a year if they'll get biometric screening, because wellness is a great thing to keep employees engaged in those companies. It also, by the way, saves money in the communities. It saves money from our healthcare system, but it's the right thing to do for those employees. So if you're at one of our companies and you get your blood pressure and your cholesterol and your body fat index and your triglycerides taken every year, we'll pay you $250. A lot of other companies punish employees who have bad health impacts. We give you an incentive to maintain healthiness. We have a similar effort when it comes to ethical sourcing, to make sure all of our companies that are sourcing from around the world. So bottom line is, we believe that because of the nature of what we do and the portfolio nature of our investment, we can not only share best practices when it comes to operationally improving companies, but also when it comes to how those companies take their place within society. It isn't something that the firm has done forever. It's something we've done in the last 7 or 8 years. It's something we're constantly committed to making ourselves better at. It's not something we brag about a lot, but it is something that is absolutely part of our DNA today, and we're committed to constantly making it better, looking at new areas where we can make investments that in fact do good while also doing well.
Thank you. Treasurer Wheeler?
Yes. Ed, thank you for the question. It's a good one, it's a provocative one, and the premise is important. I just want to buttress what Ken said by saying the Oregon Investment Council, which manages the state's $88 billion investment portfolio, of which I'm a member, and I just want to acknowledge John Shervum, who's the Chief Investment Officer for the state, is here as well. We have actually, over the last several months, convened experts from around the country to help the Oregon Investment Council internalize ESG principles, not as a side program, but into every investment decision we make going forward. So I want you to know, Ed, that I'm committed to that kind of leadership. And although I'm not ready to make an announcement today, we are going to be making an announcement shortly about a very exciting ESG option that will be available to those who are participating in the PERS pension system. So it's the right kind of leadership for the future. We want to make money and we want to do a good job, but we want to do it by doing good at the same time. Those principles are not necessarily in conflict.
Thank you. Our next question, please.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Mary Pivoteau. I'm a City Club member. Thank you, Treasurer Wheeler, and your friends that you brought today to speak to us, and thank you for your leadership on this. I read recently that 8 of the 10 poorest retirees in our state in Oregon are women. And I'm concerned about the gender issue. I'm concerned that that's somewhat related to the motherhood penalty, that motherhood is the leading cause of poverty. And I'm wondering how your program will address the differently employed conditions of women who need the flexibility, who leave the workforce at certain times to do the job of mothering, and how generally the program will support the family work balance that needs to happen. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the questions, and I don't want to hog all the answers, so I absolutely want my colleagues to be able to answer any and all of these questions as they have experience to share. We believe that the most important aspect of our recommendations to the legislature that address the issue that you raised, the employment situation that many women find themselves in, going in and out of employment, working part-time, working for companies that don't necessarily offer a retirement plan. We believe all of those things are addressed, first by focusing the entirety of our recommendations on those employees who work for employers who don't offer a plan. So that's sort of the first big frame. The second part that gets to your issue is around portability. We heard very compelling testimony that any plan that we pursue has to be portable, not only between jobs, but also as you go into and out of and back into employment situations. We believe that's in a very important way to capture those people who don't currently have access to retirement plans through more traditional employment. If we can't address those things, we're not going to be able to move the dial very far. Those economic/social justice issues, I think, are really critical nuts that we have to crack in order to increase retirement savings overall in the state of Oregon. So I appreciate the answer, or the question that you asked.
Next question, please.
Yes, my name is Cole Inman. I'm a former business professor, and I volunteer in half a dozen high schools and one university trying to teach the basics of financial planning because students aren't getting it. And given that defined benefit plans have been pretty much going away in the private sector, it seems critical that after reading, writing, and arithmetic, we teach students about diversification, stocks, bonds, compounding. Obviously, when you're in your 20s, you do a lot better when you start in your 50s. What can be done to bring financial education to the schools so that by the time any student graduates in this country, they know the basics to basically protect themselves and provide this retirement security? Thank you.
Thank you. Kathleen, you want to take that question?
Yes, I think it's very, very important to have financial literacy. And you know, in Maryland, we have been working with the banks and to do financial literacy in the schools. However, it is not the answer to this problem, really. It's an important thing to know, but even if you know a lot, it doesn't give you the access that you need. And so while it's critical to have financial literacy, you still need the ability to be able to get yourself into a fund if your employer does not offer one. So I think I saw the recommendations from Ted Wheeler's task force, and I saw the critique of it, which like 8 of those critiques had to do with we need better education. I believe in education, but it's not going to be the answer if you don't actually have the opportunity to have access to a real a fund. And the fact is, this is what you need too. So education is critical, but it's not going to be the only answer. So one of the things you can get your students to do is lobby the state legislature and get Ted's bill passed. That would be the best education they could get.
If I could just also add a little color commentary in terms of our task force actual recommendations, we agree with Kathleen that education is critical, but it's not sufficient to solve the problem. And you should probably know, this is a gratuitous plug, but the state treasury is actively involved in financial literacy programs. For many years, we've had a program in Oregon called Reading is an Investment. We reach out to hundreds of schools across the state and introduce young people, even at the elementary level, to basic financial principles. We also work here in Oregon in partnership with credit unions and banks, and it's a good start. But I agree with the premise of your question. There's much more we can do, and therefore the task force asked as a follow-up step for the legislature that we further investigate what best practices actually work, what do people respond to, what would help encourage additional retirement savings. So again, we see it as a necessary element, but not sufficient.
Well, one of the things that does help is if, and some states have done this, and for instance, San Francisco has done this, every child that's born, they give them a savings bond. And it's not much, I think it's $50. So every child knows they have a savings account, and they can see physically what happens to that savings account, and they feel better about themselves because they have a savings account. And the studies have shown that people with a savings account take better care of themselves physically. Have you seen those studies? Oh, well, you should know about them. People who save, people who have a savings account, a retirement account, actually eat better and do more physical exercise than those who don't, because they feel that they're going to live longer because they have money in the bank, and therefore they might as well take care of themselves. So a little known fact, very useful for his task force. And I'm not suggesting you have another piece of legislation. I know you have a lot on your plate, but that's what they've done in other states, and that might be interesting, because once a child actually has money in the bank and an account, they're more apt to be interested in what you have to teach them. Thanks.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Hi, thanks to the panel, and a special thank you to the out-of-town guests. I'm Joyce DeMonin, member of the City Club, and I think we have an awesome plan that the task force came up with. We have a champion in Treasurer Wheeler who's committed to passing this in 2015. And I might ask this question to Ken. How can we really make this a bipartisan effort? Because when we got the task force started, it was primarily a Democratic effort that did that. And I agree with you, this is something you'd think that the Republicans would really want to be behind. And how can we help Main Street in Oregon understand how this idea could really be an economic benefit for the entire state?
Thanks for the question. I think it is really important. I think the way that's done is what Ted and the group have already been doing, and that is a couple things. One is in developing the proposal and in moving it forward, opening the door and talking to and engaging with everyone so that everyone feels like they have skin in the intellectual game of developing the solution first. Second, when you develop that solution, you listen to people, you hear things that people don't like. So often there is criticism that these plans will force people to do things they don't want to do. Yet in this case, it's voluntary. Sometimes there's criticism that these plans are bad for small business because they impose a burden on employers. Yet this plan imposes no burden on employers. Other times you hear concerns that these plans will cannibalize existing efforts within the state, existing financial service providers, existing investment opportunities. But as Ted has identified, his approach would be to offer those existing providers actually more potential customers and more ability to offer solutions on a level playing field. So I think that the ability to kind of take one by one the perspective and potential criticisms off the table is a real part of what helps make it bipartisan. Third thing I'd say is, at a national level, the work that Kathleen and I and Ted and others are doing has the support of and the contributions of and the participation of people across the political spectrum. So I do think this is an issue that could, done wrong, be partisan. But if you do it like Ted's done it, then there's no reason it shouldn't be bipartisan.
We have run out of time. I'm sorry, we have run out of broadcast time for further questions, and we'll have to stop for the day. But as we close, please join me in offering our sincere thanks to today's guests, Ken MEHLMAN, Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, Ted Wheeler, and Jenny Madcourt.